Good morning to everyone who is joining us this morning in this webinar series, which we have been driving for the fourth year this year. And let me say, I'm proud of you, Dan, and the team from Future Cities Africa, who have really gave us this platform, created this medium for us to be able to have these conversations. And also, it's a true definition of how digital transformation, how technology can be used effectively in solving our societal problems that we are faced with. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Zolani and the surname is Zonyane. Currently the Editorial Director, Webinar Curator and Moderator at the Municipal Edge. It's proper to first acknowledge, as I've done, the Future Cities Africa for creating this platform, the team from the Municipal Edge, in continuously ensuring that we have these, we call them local government conversations, and it's conversations that we cannot have without local governments. And the topic of today, it goes beyond, I would say, the technical aspects that we might have focused on in our previous webinars this year, because we want to get to the core of ethical governance, ethical leadership, but more the solutions, because our panel is solution-driven based on the work that they do, the contributions in their areas of focus, specifically on the issue of leadership. What I'll do will be to introduce my panel briefly, for them also to greet our audience as we begin with this session this morning. But it's important to highlight for the benefit of the audience that there is a code of ethical leadership which has been developed by the Ethics Institute in partnership with the Department of Cooperative Governance, the South African Local Government Association, together with the Moral Regeneration Movement. And looking at the code of ethics itself, if you might not have gone through it, I'll be dropping that particular link. It begins by linking the code to the white paper on local government of 1998. And as we are aware, there is a current process of reviewing that white paper. The white paper envisions the type of political leadership, and I will extend that to say, not only to limit it to political leadership, but it must be a leadership which provides a community-wide leadership and vision. And I'll explain shortly in terms of the word community, and for the purpose of this conversation, what is it that we are looking at? It is a leadership also that must constantly build a capacity, not only its capacity as leadership, but the capacity of those involved in the value chain of governing our municipalities. And again, colleagues, as I've indicated, this is a code that is more about the roles of the leaders and how the leaders must conduct themselves, how they should play that ethical role, and ensuring that we've got effective municipalities. And as we read through the code, it also makes references and draws similarities to the code of corporate governance, which we have been accustomed to. And as I close this opening remark, still drawing from the code itself, it also recognizes that municipalities have got three arms or components: the council, administration, and the community as we know it. What I often do on the community, if you look at the council and administration, that's a community on its own institutionally, but we've got various professionals, various professions who belong to various bodies. At that particular level, that's a community on its own. And then we've got ourselves as the citizens, as the community. And I'm making that inference because the code itself is not only for municipalities, but everyone who has a business dealing with the municipalities. That could be the businesses, various community formations, ourselves as citizens as well. And the code itself sets out clearly how can communities be supported through the spirit of the principles of the code itself. On that note, let me also welcome our audience. As always, your presence, your participation is appreciated. Your contributions through our chat box, through our Q&A option is available. And it will be interesting also to hear from you, not only the questions, but also propose some solutions on how best we can close this gap, which has been widely diagnosed in terms of the challenge. This morning, it's about solutions. In our panel, we've got Mr. Anton Groenewald, who is the group head of regional operations within the city of Tshwane. Anton, can you greet our audience?
Good morning, Zolani. Good morning, fellow panelist members, and good morning to the participants. I hope it will be informative and, at the very least, interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Anton. Secondly, we've got Dr. Harlan Cloete, who is, I'll say, one of those South Africans who are directly involved in communities broadly, beyond the work that he does. He's the chairman and founder member of Radio KC 107.7 FM, which is in Paarl, also the managing director of CIGFARO, which focuses around capacity development, and a research fellow from the University of Free State. Doc, welcome, and can you greet our audience?
Good morning, Zolani, and good morning to the panelists and the audience. It's a privilege and an honor to be on this platform, and I'm really looking forward to learning a lot. I'm a lifelong learner. Thanks.
Thanks, Doc. We also have Nosipho Hlatshwayo, currently the Chief Executive Officer of the South African Cities Network, and she has also occupied quite a number of executive positions through her influence, and it's those learnings that we'll be drawing from today. Nosipho, welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Very excited about today's session, not only to hear from the panelists, but also feedback from the participants. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Lastly, we've got Dr. Lungelwa Kaywood, who is also one of our own within the Municipal Edge. But today, she represents the Western Cape branch of the Chartered Institute of Government Finance, Audit and Risk Officers. She is also a post-doctoral research fellow within the Stellenbosch University Chair in Urban Law and Sustainability Governance. Doc, great to have you.
Good morning to everybody. It's good to see some familiar faces. I am looking forward to spending these next 2 hours with you. Thanks for having me.
No, thanks a lot to the panelists, and it will be amiss if I don't acknowledge our sponsors in business engineering and Ntiyiso Consulting Group. Without that support, that collaboration, it will be hard to have these conversations. It also assists in ensuring that we've got our audience without them paying for these webinars. But I always say, there's someone who's bearing the cost. So we are appreciative of those collaborations. Also, the support that we continue to get, as I've indicated, from the Chartered Institute of Government Finance, Audit and Risk Officers in CIGFARO, the South African Local Government Association, and the Center for Municipal Asset Management. Because the conversations we drive through these webinars also contribute to the wider discourse on how best we can improve the situation in our municipalities. Let me start with you, Anton, based on the current work that you do, the service that you provide, your experience, looking at this ethical governance, ethical leadership. How do we, as practitioners, because you are from the practitioner point of view, ensure that the knowledge, experience that we have, we impart to others as we continue to guide them, but also sharing your personal experiences through the leadership journey itself. As I say, we are solving the problem this morning and not diagnosing, and I believe you'll be setting the scene for the conversation this morning. Over to you, Anton.
Thanks very much, Zolani, and thanks for making me go first. That means I have to raise the bar. So let me just say from the outset that this is an extremely perplexing aspect of local government. In my belief, there should be an embedded understanding of ethics and the way in which we behave as local government practitioners. But having said that, I went through 4 different pieces of legislation, and I just wanted to comment very quickly. So in the Constitution, sections 195, 1A, it's the first time there's reference to the promotion of professional ethical conduct. The second time is in section 217 on supply chain, where reference is made to supply chain has to be fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, and cost effective. And those are the only 2 somewhat defined responsibilities that we have. In the MFMA, there's just over 45 references, and I'm going to use the word references because nowhere in any of the legislation is professional ethical conduct or ethics defined explicitly so that there's no contestation on the interpretation. Right? So to me, ethical conduct is made up of a variety of types of behavior. And I suppose for me, the first reference in sections 32 and 53 and 60 of the MFMA reference is made to take all reasonable steps either to implement or to prevent or to prohibit certain actions. And those are words that you'll hear often, take all reasonable steps in different parts of the different legislation. In section 60 of the MFMA, accounting officers, municipal managers, CFOs are required to provide guidance to political structures with regards to the facts and issues that are critical to decision making. I raise this because this is a critical AGSA finding when it comes to non-performance and non-adherence of local authorities. That accounting officers, municipal managers, CFOs are not providing the quality of information, or if they are, then political structures are acting contrary to that. Section 61 is probably the closest we get to a definition, where it says the accounting officer, municipal manager has a fiduciary responsibility. And what does that mean? Section 61A says to act with fidelity, honesty, integrity. Section 61B says to disclose, and here it is again, to disclose such facts and issues that may be critical to decision-making to council. Section 62, the general financial functions, there's again a request to act with fidelity, honesty, integrity, take all reasonable steps. And then I want to raise this one under section 62, 1F3, implement credit control and debt collection and revenue management. An AGSA finding that says councils are not applying this explicitly, and of course, given our financial position, here is an explicit instruction to both council and the administration to do so. 64, revenue is effective revenue collection systems. Municipalities are not making every effort to do so. Then another major AGSA finding, section 65, expenditure, section 65, 2A, there must be a system of controls for expenditure, approval, authorization, withdrawal, and payment of service providers. How many times do we see ex-supplier receiving several hundred million in advance for services yet to be delivered, or payment in excess of what is considered market-related or competitive costs? Another major consistent finding. Then section 74, if the municipal manager accounting officer cannot or is not allowed to implement any of these powers set out that I've just mentioned, that municipal manager and accounting officer is instructed and required to inform the MEC for local government and the MEC for provincial treasury. Now, you look at the number of municipalities that are in disarray, how many accounting officers and municipal managers feel safe and comfortable and secure enough to be able to make that disclosure. And then Section 76 gives a protection of the accounting officer, although I've yet to see that in action. And so, Chair, if I go through the variety of aspects of the MFMA, the role of the CFO, it stipulates what the competency levels are. Another constant AG finding is that CFOs of municipalities do not meet the prescribed levels. Fiduciary duties in terms of Section 94, the duty of the accounting officer and the CFO, fidelity, honesty, integrity in 94.1b. 94.1c says the accounting officer must disclose such facts as are required for decision making. 1d must prevent prejudice or prohibit any activity which may act inconsistently with the requirements and powers and functions. Section 112 on SCM, on fraud, it says there specifically you must combat fraud. Here's the second reference to, explicit reference to professional ethics, 1121M2, promote ethics of officials. 1121J, disclosure of interests. All of these are AG findings that are explicitly expressed in the legislation. So, Chair, that's the first point. The second point I want to make, and you did say not to speak politics, but there are less than 10 references to the same restrictions and prohibitions to the executive mayor. In Section 56 of the Structures Act, powers and functions of the mayor, 56.3c2, the executive mayor is required to assist in the monitoring in the efficiency of credit control and revenue and debt collections, and there are a few other provisions. That section is the only section in law in which the powers and functions of the mayor are to some extent linked to that of the accounting officer and or the municipal manager. So, Chair, there's a significant and substantial difference in the powers and functions afforded to either the accounting officer or the CFO or even supply chain management officials versus holding the political level of accountability to the same standard. And the fact that professional ethics and ethical behavior is not explicitly defined is perhaps one of the areas that needs to be tightened up on in terms of the improvement in ethical conduct, and that perhaps if it's made explicit across the various levels of accountability, perhaps there'll be an improvement in behavior. Chair, I'm not sure if I've spent 5-6 minutes. I'm not sure if that's adequate as an opening gambit. We're having a debate, so I can stop there, or if you want, I've got a few other points to make. So let me stop and pause at this point. Thank you.
Okay. No, let's reserve those points for when you come in again. It will also touch maybe on answering some of the questions that have come through. And perhaps as we transition to Dr. Cloete, and also for the purpose of the panelists that will be coming in, we have received quite a number of questions and comments during the registrations, and maybe let me touch on a few of them, also in assisting in shaping the conversation itself. We had one that came from Krugersdorp, from Sibongile Mavimbela, who is an executive director. And really what is coming through is that we would like to see a better outlook of future cities, including sustainable eco-city design. We also request that government should include capacity building for the youth and support their inclusion in leadership roles. And I believe between Dr. Cloete and Nosipho, specifically on these comments, they'll be able to reflect. We also heard one from municipal manager of Moderator in Waterberg, which really is a question which, again, as we engage this morning, it will assist in driving the conversation. in terms of what are some of the tools of foresight needed to empower the breed of leaders needed to usher our cities into prosperous and sustainable future. You can see in terms of these questions, also they begin to seek solutions than to stem the challenges or regurgitate what we already know. As I welcome Dr. Cloete and looking at these questions, Doc, you are involved in communities based on the service that you provide. And again, we believed that it's South Africans like you who could add value to this conversation in reflecting on what is being done and how can the broader community join in ensuring that we build these sustainable municipalities that we talk about. Over to you, Doc.
No, thank you very much. Can I just switch off my phone there? Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah. I forgot that. Sorry. Look, thank you very much for the question. I think when it comes to any institution, you know, I think as the author John Maxwell who said, everything rises and falls on leadership. That is the first thing. The second thing is, you know, is ethics caught or is it taught? Can it teach a person to be ethical? You know, I would like us to share some thoughts about that. And I always ask students, is ethics caught or taught, you know, in terms of modeling behavior, ethical and accountable behavior? The question about supporting unemployed youth, I think that is such an important question. Earlier in this year, the community radio launched a knowledge sharing festival. And the really purpose of that festival was we undertook a road trip about 3 years ago in our broadcast area. And what came out so very clear is that young people want to know where the opportunities are. And so we didn't want just another talk shop. I think what we're very good at is hoarding sometimes knowledge and not sharing that knowledge. And so we created a platform for what we call ABCG, for academia, business, community, and government to come together and to share best practice, you know, share models of what is working and where it is working. How do we replicate that in communities? I'm also working on a paper now of, is community radio a part of local government? You know, and the role that community radio plays as a storyteller, but also as the center of community conversations, you know. So I can share on what we are doing in that space in terms of disseminating information and not hoarding information, and making sure that we perform our activist role in society by speaking truth to power, by challenging the status quo, by making sure that we create a platform for communities to engage, and in that way strengthen our democratic discourse.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for that, Doc. And again, it begins to demonstrate the importance of the broader society in solving these challenges, but more so the impact that the work you do has on the younger generation. I often argue to say the leaders that we have in our institutions, they come from our communities. If we don't begin to solve the problems at that particular level, to ensure that if we talk about ethical governance, ethical leadership, we don't just wait for them to come to the institutions and then we start deliberating around those. That's great. As I allow Nosipho to come in shortly, it's also important, not only for the benefit of the audience, that as we have been having these webinars for the 4th year, we have had also other partners who have joined us. We have hosted national and provincial departments, specifically around finance in terms of the treasuries and cooperative governance and traditional affairs. But beyond that, we've got other institutes, because even in the audience, we've got various sectors of society. We've got academia, your civil society, youth formations, and we often work with the Institute of Local Government Management, and I see some of the colleagues have joined us as well. We are grateful for that, and also the Chartered Institute of Audit Governance, Oversight and Leadership. So those are the collaborations and partnerships that also help in shaping our conversations as we take them further. Nosipho, you, as I've indicated, you have occupied executive roles within the broader framework of how our institutions are set up. But this morning, it's about firstly sharing, I would say, your own experience and how, I would say, on a daily basis, because the position you occupy, even now, daily, you are faced with challenges around these issues of ethical governance, the issues of ethical leadership. Now, your own experience and what is it that you can, I won't say propose, but rather ensure that as we leave this webinar today, there is that level of empowerment and also giving hope to many who have joined us this morning. Welcome, and over to you.
Thank you so much. Your question just threw a spanner in how I'd prepared to maybe introduce the input. But I think what's important for me is that you cannot separate ethical leadership and ethical governance from being a responsible leader. And with that, in my understanding is that we need to at least appoint people in the positions of power and influence, particularly in our public institutions. And I'm not excluding the private institutions, but because we're talking about municipalities and the public institutions, people that will lead with purpose and create general value, not just for themselves, but for the society that they're working in. Obviously, at the same time, they need to be navigating complex and conflicting personal and universal goals, because those things don't often align with each other. So there may be conflict between what I'm required to do for the municipality that I work for, institution that I work for the family, and also society, in the society that I am in. So in this context, it requires that our leaders are able to manage these relationships and the needs that they bring about, and they're able to root that in values that build ethical relationships with their stakeholders and their interconnected society. So having said that, it does then require that the leader herself understands their own mental models, they understand their own desires, they also understand how they interact with other people, so that when those red flags come up, they can check themselves, come back and say, how is this able, how is it likely to influence how I'm about to act? The second thing that I also want to highlight here is there is no ways that we can say we're talking about ethical leadership and ethical governance and remove it from the need for leaders to be understanding the entire system within which they work. I saw that on the chat. Somebody posted that leaders must come until officials stay in the communities in which they serve. Ethics remain a myth. They're saying that someone must stay in the area so that if they are experiencing service delivery issues, then it hits home. And I would agree with that, but I would further say ethical leadership requires you to also understand what does it mean if you act or if you do not act? So earlier on, Mr. Groenewald was citing or giving us some excerpts from the legislation. Whether you do something or you do not do it, it does have consequences. And if you take an example, let me just take an example, because we sometimes take these things and say, we try to, or maybe wrongly so, we may think that leadership is about people that are in senior management in municipalities. Even for officials that are, say, in the administrative role, in supply chain within municipalities, ethical leadership is required. So if you apply that, what does it mean for the entire system? My role as an SCM person who's just supposed to process particular pieces of paper that are linked to a particular request for proposals or request for tender. If you don't understand how a bigger system is impacted by you delaying, by you not acting fast, by you not being thorough in what you're doing, you then put the entire system in a risk of, maybe it could be about water shortages in a particular area. So understanding the system is really at the center of ethical leadership. It is not a complicated, it's not a complicated thing. But then you would need to, as I said earlier on, ask yourself, what drives you? What are my values? And what are my mental models? By that, I mean, what influences your thought around service delivery as a person? Are your thoughts influenced by maybe the long-held ideas around what government is meant to do outside of the role that you actually play? So it's earlier on, Doc was saying, is it something that is taught, or is it something that a person can you teach someone ethical leadership? I would say that it is something that one can cultivate, but it does require for you to step back and say, but where am I in this whole issue of ethics and leadership? Assess where you are, and then see where there are gaps, and then act accordingly. And on a daily basis, we are faced with situations where our ethics are tested, and reflecting on how you acted so that you can be better is something that we would need to talk about. And unfortunately, it's not a simple answer that says, okay, let's send them to a course to learn about ethical leadership, and then they're going to come back as this neatly packaged a group of people that are now going to act ethically. It requires more work, and it is work for us to get to a point where we've cultivated these people, whom, even if you put in an environment that is going to test their ethics, they will be able to do the right thing because they understand the system. They understand the role that they need to play, that it's not just about them, but it is about the bigger mission that they're supposed to serve.
Thanks a lot for those inputs, and you are making quite valuable insights, specifically on the issue that you are raising on leadership, not being confined at the higher level. What I often say, specifically to officials that I deal with, is that if you run a process, you might be the only person that makes you a leader in that specific process that you are running. You don't necessarily need to have maybe people reporting to you for you to then be recognized as a leader. And I think that's profound. And those who have joined us in the audience, who find themselves in those particular positions, definitely they'll be taking something from that submission. Thanks a lot. We'll come back to you, and also specifically linking to that question I raised earlier on, based on the work that you do. I'll read it again as soon as we get to that slot. Dr. Kaywood, you have been in the space You have also occupied executive positions, being a deputy manager as well, and also the work that you currently do. Similarly, with just panelists in terms of sharing your experience, your insights, and how do we solve this dilemma that we find ourselves in. Let me welcome you for your contribution.
Well, thank you, Zolani, and thanks to the panelists that spoke before me. I hope I am audible. I am not sure if I have an answer in terms of how do we solve, because that's a vexing question, to an issue that has been plaguing our country, compromising service delivery, compromising the very democracy that we pride ourselves in this country. In fact, my input today is motivated as well by a comment I just saw on the text, on the chat tool. It has disappeared now, but there we go. Edwin Mulevale talks about how, unfortunately, public do report corrupt activities, but there are no consequences from municipalities. Then it talks about a TikTok video, and that the consequence management or lack thereof is exactly what I would want to be contributing on. What Mr. Groenewald does is to lay the legal basis of ethical conduct in our country. And we have got sufficient laws, legislative framework in my view. There are other comments that are being made by colleagues. So let me start off with that, with a statement perhaps to say, we cannot teach one to be ethical, in my view. But we can perhaps enforce ethical behavior through the legislation or the legal framework that Mr. Groenewald has outlined, because it is adequate, but we are not using it for a number of reasons. There's fear, because there might be repercussions for the one that is actually reporting the unethical behavior, as we have seen with your whistleblowers in this country that have been killed and are continuously being killed. So the topic we are addressing today, therefore, could not be more urgent. Just 2 days ago, our president delivered a stark reminder about the state of governance in our municipalities. So this conversation, Zolani, isn't just merely academic. It's about really the very foundation of trust between our government and the communities that it should be serving. So thank you for having this discussion. We have to constantly go back and ask ourselves, or at least remind ourselves, why ethical governance remains critical for our communities. It's not a luxury. It's, I say, the bedrock upon which functional democracy, we call ourselves a democracy as a country. It's a bedrock upon which functional democracy rests. It really represents that sacred contract that we have taken for granted between government institutions in its whole, as well as the communities that government exists to serve. You see, when we have ethics that are guiding the decisions, and I want to ask at this point, what guides the choices that you make? What guides the decisions that you take as a public servant? So, because when we have ethics that are guiding the decision-making processes, we see trust flourishing between the communities or citizens and their representatives or the organs of state that are closest to them, and in many instances is the municipalities. We see resources allocated based on the need, the pressing needs, and not for personal gain, where we sit and we argue about the available resources to decide how much should be allocated to this department because we have got personal vested interest. When ethics guide our decision makings, we see transparency that empowers our communities to really hold us accountable. So we publish the outcomes of whatever it is that we are doing as government institution. However, the converse is then true, Zolani, in that when those ethical standards collapse, then the consequences are really devastating for everyone, the country in its entirety. Decisions then become self-serving than community-focused. We have, there's this room for corruption, corrupt opportunities. They multiply like a virus through the system, as we are observing in this country. And inevitably then we have this public confidence that is eroded, leaving communities disillusioned and really disengaged completely in terms of what government is doing. So this matters, Zolani, it still matters profoundly, because local government is the democracy's front line. In my view, you can disagree. It is the sphere that is closest to the people, the one that is responsible for delivering the very basic needs that we have as communities, like water, that we see that many of you in Gauteng are struggling to access. And so ethical behavior matters. And then I go back to Mr. Groenewald, and I appreciate his legal reference. But then I want to remind us again that despite this robust legislation, specifically talking about the MFMA now and the PFMA, enforcement remains inconsistent when we look at consequence management. It is weak, Zolani, across many municipalities and even other organs of state. And laws without enforcement then are really merely suggestions. Having served as a deputy municipal manager in a municipality, I have witnessed firsthand how ethical lapses can create ripple effects that really extend far beyond the initial transgression. And the damage of such runs deep, requiring really years of dedicated efforts to repair that broken trust and really restore effective delivery. So if this is happening at a municipal level, at a provincial level, at a national level, then can you imagine how much effort we are going to need to take to repair this country if we successfully break it? And so here's the fundamental truth as I conclude. Ethical governance cannot take root in soil poisoned by impunity. At every level of leadership, we need to be embracing accountability, not just through these well-crafted policies that we have, but really through consistent consequence management that operates independently of political influence. I should not be scared to discipline or apply consequence management because an employee is going to tell me I am going to report you to this political party. So it is not complex. It is not a complex theory. It's common sense. When public officials face real consequences for misconduct, it sends out a very strong and unmistakable message throughout the system that unethical behavior will not be tolerated regardless of your connections or your position. And I want to emphasize that consequence management, lastly, isn't about punishment for its own sake. It's rather some strategic tool we should use to restore institutional integrity that has been compromised in the entire public service. It's about rebuilding community trust that we have shattered and improving performance by really establishing clear standards and expectations. Thank you.
Thanks for those inputs, Doc. And also lashing on the very last point you are raising on consequence management. And it's something that as well goes beyond just the officials or administration, but also looking at the political leadership. When I talk about that consequence management, as you put it, and correctly so, that until we move away from taking the disciplinary processes or procedures as something that is punitive, other than a tool to identify the gaps, and from the level of, I'll say, management, how do we then begin to close such gaps in ensuring that we build the capacity that we need? Shortly, I'll allow you, Anton, to come in because you still had other points you wanted to make. But as we do that, also there were some few additional questions and comments which should again assist in shaping the conversation, like the one that came from Itumeleng Mosala, who is in Water local municipality, looking at specifically what are the ingredients necessary to conclude that we have an ethical, high moral leadership. And as part of your opening, and also part of the contributions by the panelists, partly, we have touched on that. And there's also another one which came from Nigeria. That's how these podcasts are wide. We've got Idris Issa from Zaria, who is with Ahmadu Bello University, a lecturer and a researcher. And again, I believe, Dr. Cloete, when you come in, this one will also probably touch on the work and the service that you do on how does best practices of citizen-centric ethical governance help in strengthening local municipalities, in transforming local communities. But before we take Anton, we've got a poll that then will be loading shortly, just to get a sense of whether has your institution adopted the code of ethical leadership in local government. And again, it's broad beyond the municipalities, because the code itself recognizes that if you deal with municipalities, you've got the business with municipalities, you could be a private business, a community organization. The code itself, it also applies to you as well in ensuring that, as we say, municipalities must adopt and implement. We will do the same in our own corners, which we operate in. And I see, and it's good to have the 47% of those who have already taken the poll to say yes, and 18% is no, and then also a majority are still working on it, which by itself, it's not bad. And again, it's important for you to participate and contribute to this poll, because we are about 89 of us at this point. But then it's also important just to get the broader sense and understanding of whether do we develop these codes, these documents, these policies, and yet nothing is being done. What is important, in a recent summit by CIGFARO, we had the Ethics Institute, which also shared quite, I'll say, news that many municipalities are adopting the code. But then again, it's one thing to adopt, do we then implement, which then becomes one of those critical elements as we have these conversations. Of those who have taken the poll, 46% is indicating yes, 25% no, and those 25%, you need to look at the code itself, but more so in terms of your institutions. Maybe you must be that advocate who then ensures that the code is embraced, it is implemented, and the 29% at the moment are working on it. Please do, because for us to change the current situation, we need these guidelines, these codes to ensure that we've got that support system. Thanks a lot, Dan, for the poll. We will be taking a second one, maybe shortly before we end our conversation this morning. But then it's great to know that for those who have taken the poll, 46% at least indicates that indeed the code has been adopted. Let me welcome you again, Anton, as I've indicated, because I know you've got quite a lot to share based on your experience. Again, given your opening submission, you still wanted to add more. but also touching on these questions and comments that have come through, specifically to empower our audience as well.
Thanks very much, Zolani. First of all, I'd like to express sincere appreciation to Gift Mahodi, who's given quite a lengthy submission in the chat box. I do want to say I agree with much of what he has said, and I think it speaks to one of the weaknesses in the institutional makeup, but I'm going to touch on that in a minute. I do want to disagree with Ms. Moloko and my fellow panelists that the community's proximity to a municipal official can also go the other way. Just because you know where I stay, you're going to demand services. By the same token, if somebody knocks on my door and says, I know where your wife works, I know which schools your kids go to, there's a decision coming your way if you don't make the right decision. So proximity to the community, because remember, in each community, and there's not everybody that is going to be there to try and extract better services from you. You are also at risk as an official. So maybe I should also disclose my second reason for being opposed to the notion that location and proximity is a requirement for good ethics is I would not have had a career if that was the case, because I've worked in 4 institutions in 3 different provinces. So maybe I'm taking that a little bit personally, but I want to make the point that proximity to the community is a dual-edged sword. I wanted to take issue quickly with Dr. Cloete's comment. Can ethics be taught? The issue of moral renewal. And I think my fellow panelist, Ms. Hlatshwayo, was trying to make the point around all of our religious systems, all of our community social systems, our societies uphold a few basic principles that are common to all of us. Don't steal, don't covet your neighbor's goods, don't commit theft, don't commit adultery, don't murder. You know, these are provisions across all cultures that are, I would argue, is the basic foundation for all of our social interaction. And so what then is the requirement in order to address the issue that we are dealing with? And so just very quickly, before I go to my other 2 points. So what is ethical behavior? And I think we didn't say it with explicitly enough. So the general accepted definition is doing the right thing at the right time for the right reason. And I would add sort of regardless or especially if nobody is looking, right? So that's generally considered the standard definition of what ethical behavior is, that you will act appropriately regardless of whether you're under the spotlight. And then I want to add what has become the South African interpretation of that. So doing the right thing at the right time for the right reason, unless I can make another decision that benefits me or third parties without getting caught. So I say that in jest, obviously, colleagues, but I mean, that has been seen to be, because if you look at the comments from Mr. Mahodi and others on the questions, the notion that I can make decisions and get away with it has become almost a new ethical norm. But I just wanted to make that comment. My last 2 comments is the following, right? And it speaks specifically to what Mr. Mahodi has raised. And that's the following. You make reference to whether or not the institute or the local government or the organization has an ethics policy. I want to say all of our institutions are made up of the following individuals in key decision-making places, right? So town planning is governed by SATI, South African Town Planning Institute. All of the engineers is governed by Engineering Council of South Africa. So these are all entities and organizations of statute. To be a professional in that space, you need to have the necessary qualification. If you're a nurse in a clinic or a doctor, you need to be a member of the Health Professions Council. If you're an auditor, Institute of Internal Auditors. If you're an accountant, either CIGFARO, CIGFARO, or South African Institute of Chartered Accountants. If you're in law enforcement, traffic police, legal services. So all of the key functions that make local government work are governed by institutions who all have as a requirement for your membership that you act ethically, with fidelity, with honesty, first do no harm, ensure. So one would almost argue that in addition to the local government prescripts that I've identified, these professions have a second responsibility to their profession to act with the necessary probity. Then the issue of consequence management was raised. And the reason why I say ethics policy is potentially lip service is that in order to deal with consequence management, and I have 2 points here. The first one is I get a lot of complaints from people saying, but I told you. And I say, listen, the onus, Zolani, on me as a group head or even as an accounting officer to take disciplinary action is that the evidence must be irrefutable. The two unions representing local government are very strong. Imatu and Samu have got some of the strongest lawyers. And if you do not have a watertight case, I can't just say, you know, Zolani sent me a message saying he saw Anton put his hand in the cookie jar. The law requires that Zolani give me a picture saying, on this day, at this hour, I saw Anton. Here's a picture of Anton. Here's a picture of Anton's hand in the cookie jar. Here's a picture of Anton's hand coming out of the cookie jar. Here he is eating the cookie. The prescripts on disciplinary actions are so prescriptive and so restrictive. And at the moment you ask a member of the public to put it in an affidavit, they go, I know, because they want you to take action, but they don't want to take the responsibility of enabling you. But that's another matter. Then just quickly on consequence management. The collective bargaining agreement between local government and the two unions defines 8 acts that are allowed for immediate dismissal. They are theft, assault, operating and or working under the influence of drugs or alcohol. And here's where it gets interesting. Gross negligence, gross insubordination, misleading and misinformation to council, bringing the organization into disrepute. And then the others are sexual and gender and sexual harassment and those kinds of things. So there are 5 of the prescripts in the consequence management guidelines of the local bargaining agreement allows municipalities to act with impunity. So why don't they? And that's one of the questions that GIFT raises and one of the issues that we do struggle with. The enforceability, the laxity, the reluctance, I don't know what it is. But I want to say that the ethics structure of our communities and our organizations are only as strong as its weakest link. And if its weakest link sits at the top, if it starts with the mayoral committee or executive mayor or members of council or with the accounting officer, if you're compromised, as I think Gift Mahodi makes the point quite explicitly, if you're compromised at the top, you're not going to be able to act with impunity. And I say this because for those who don't know me, 11 clean audits consecutively since 2012, wherever I've worked and whenever function I've held. It is because there is zero tolerance. There's zero tolerance for non-compliance with these prescripts. And in my third iteration, if we get to that, there is another issue that says there are 2 levels of government that are complicit in this ethical failure, and that's provincial governments and national governments, because the law is also clear. Section 133 says there are consequences for non-compliance. That sits with provincial treasury or provincial cogta. There's sections 136, and this is what I find extraordinary, right? So section 136 provides for provincial intervention. 31.7 Section 137 says discretionary provincial intervention. Section 138 says serious provincial intervention. Section 139 says mandatory provincial intervention. So the provincial authorities have the ethical responsibility of saying, hey, Ditsa Butler, you are not acting appropriately. Hey, Maluti Pafong, you're not acting appropriately. Hey, Joe Marks in Northwest. There is sufficient grounds. Then sections 150 also allows for national intervention. So for me, you know, the ethical essence is who in this chain of ethicality and oversight starts to build that foundation unrelentingly, unquestioningly, without fear, without fail, without prejudice. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for that, Anton. And again, it begins to reflect on quite a number of issues that have been brought up, not only by our panelists, but more so in looking at the questions and the comments that are coming through. And as I transition to Dr. Cloete and Doc, as I've indicated, it's something that you have touched on as well, but the question that came from all the way from Nigeria, and it also assists in us as a continent as well to share these best practices, specifically on the citizen-centric ethical governance that helps in strengthening local government, but also reflecting on the inputs and comments that have just come through. Over to you, Doc.
Well, thank you very much. I'll be brief. I think what I've picked up in my research and the work that we do is that politicians know and administrators know it's the community that are often left in the dark. They're not quite sure what to do and how to evaluate. You know, if so, I was at a training workshop once when the one participant said, the only time government listens to us is when they see the smoke. I ask, what do you mean? It says when we burn tires and take to the streets, then people are responsive. So there's a lot that I think we still need to do in terms of making sure that communities themselves, you know, the very structures in communities are strong. Also, I think that government, local government, is slow to wake up to the call that we co-create, that local government or officials do not have all the answers. Politicians do not have all the answers. There's a lot of goodwill and a lot of things happening in community, but those communities are not empowered to participate. You know, there is the ward committee system, which is on paper, it looks good, but it is not really working. You know, if you are with a red party, you make sure that you're surrounded by a red. If you're yellow, you surround yourself with 10 yellows. If you're blue, you surround yourself with blue. So in terms of civic education, in terms of communities understanding their rights and responsibilities, communities are not even sure what's the difference between a district municipality and a B municipality. So they are not active participants in this act of governance. When government goes out to them, it's merely a compliance exercise. And so it comes down to tick box instead of genuine agency and making sure that people are empowered. And then the thing on consequence management. You know, if you go to management science, the basics is planning, leading, organizing, and control. And so that control part, you know, of consequence, it's a combination of politics. I don't want to take action against a comrade. It's a combination of head in the sand. Let's pretend that this thing didn't happen and let's just continue hoping it will go away, but it doesn't go away. You know, what you ignore in life, what you ignore just becomes bigger. So managing by head in the sand. And I think in a lot of municipalities that I've interacted with, we know what the problem is. We don't know how often to get out of this mess. And what I've learned coming to clean audit, I did an interview research at the Oudtshoorn municipality. And so this municipality received a clean audit after almost 20 years. And I sat down with Walter Hendricks and says, now tell me what happened. How did you manage? He said, you know, it's taking issue by issue raised by the AG and working through it. There's nothing that beats hard work. There's nothing glamorous about management. You know, it's hard work. It's still work. You have to work, you know, and people think that, you know, the title makes me. It's very hard work and having that discipline to say, this is where we're going to. These are the little steps that I must do every day to bring me there. So it's not about the stage and being on the stage and making the speeches. It's hard work. And in conclusion there was a study done to say, but okay, now what do managers actually do in organizations? And the study showed that managers are disrupted right through the day. So where they can do quality work is probably an hour or two that they'll have to find. The rest, it's meetings, sometimes unnecessary meetings, disruptions, it's WhatsApp groups, it's emails, it's this. So the quality of work is about an hour a day, you know, which to really do that deep work, that deep thinking work that moves the organization forward. But in the final analysis, management is hard work. And management, the definition, Mintzberg says, leadership is simply management practice well. You say they're the same. We are overled and undermanaged. Manage is still the hard, everyday work. It's actually the boring side. It's an unglamorous side of sitting down, focusing your attention, and getting the work done. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Doc. And on your closing part of it, just like the change, as I would normally say, if leadership doesn't give you discomfort, but still continue what needs to be done, then maybe you are not in the right place. Thanks for those insights. Nosipho, I'll allow you because there have been comments and questions that have come through. But also again, looking at the focus of the South African Cities Network, more so as we continue to talk about the future of the cities, and we call it smart cities, but I say smart municipalities as well. How do we, in that same process, ensure that as we implement these strategies, these plans and insights that we have, this issue of involving communities, ensuring now, as we talk about this issue of ethics, how does the organization that you lead also ensures that we infuse all these requirements as we build these future smart, sustainable municipalities?
Zolani, it's not a complicated thing. I saw on the chat someone was talking about, I think it was Siseko who was talking about the integration of practical tools like open data systems that build transparency and in helping in combating corruption. That's one way of doing it. Very few municipalities, I know, I used to work in a municipality and they started, in fact, they wanted to start with it. I don't know how far they went with it. This the system that was going to be transparent to everyone from the time that the bids are submitted and those are things that build public trust. And even if you just have dashboards that shows, okay, it's been submitted, this is where it is now, we are at decision stage, and you know, these are the people that are going to be making the decisions. So there are already tools that are in place, and maybe Anton, because I'm referring to the city of Tshwane, there was an intention for the city of Tshwane to do that. For me, it was such an important step by the municipality, which was not only going to combat corruption, but also build trust. Because when you act with integrity, Anton, you were saying that you're doing what you say you'll do when you said you'll do it. When you do that and you improve your integrity, it then also, the result of that, the spin-off, is that trust is being built. So then people get to know that things are not happening because there are other people who are getting some bribes, or things are not delayed because there are bribes, but in the system, they're able to see that these are the reasons for glitches, and they're able to also understand and appreciate, as Dr. Cloete was saying, the hard work that is involved in getting services on the ground. And then also, while we're still talking about how do we improve those practical tools that Siseko is talking about, even in our public participation processes, because we talk about ethics, we talk about integrity. When we go out to people and we listen to what they say, their proposed solutions, because we've now moved from a time where we were just collecting the needs from people. At least I would hope that we've moved from that. When people are proposing their solutions to the challenges that are faced by the municipality, our ability to act on that and seriously consider what they are saying shows how we take them seriously, but also it also builds that trust. Now, you cannot do that if you're going to also always employ the old models or modes of trying to engage with your communities, which we've learned over time. And as Cities Network, we've also been very critical of how we don't want to evolve and use other ways of engaging with our citizenry and allow that back and forth communication with our communities, not only at a set period in time, as it is per legislation, but on an ongoing basis, so that this trust can be built. And as we move into the future, Zolani, there are a few things that I think we need to think about. One, the type of a citizen that we currently have today and the citizen that we will have tomorrow is very different to the citizen that we had when the white paper on local government was adopted in 1998. So if that citizen is different because they are more connected to global issues, they are more connected in terms of the communication tools that they have, but also scarily so, they are even more connected or have got access to much of the propaganda, good or bad, about the very own cities that they live in. How then do you engage with them? And how do you make sure that you open these channels? And how do you anticipate for the ones that are going to be playing in this arena of local government? What changes do you anticipate? And this is where I also say, as we talk about integrity, as we talk about issues of transparency in local government, we need to be anticipatory about what are we likely to face in future so that we are able to build systems and tools, test them out now. If they fail, they fail. If they succeed, then we capitalize on them. I would like Zolani to just bring it back a little bit, because I think what we were talking about, I think Dr. Lungelwa, when we were talking about consequence management, and she was talking about laws without enforcement are merely suggestions. And I also want us to be frank and honest about where a municipal worker finds him or herself, where their integrity might be tested. So when we talk about capability, the environment within which a municipal worker is, which can test the ethics. Unfortunately, they are not like a provincial worker or a national government worker. Because for some of our officials, especially the ones in senior government, pressures, temptations come not only from the municipality, but from province as well as from national government, in terms of what they may be asked to do or are expected to do because of the interconnectedness of the work that municipal officials do. Now you've got this system that is so interlinked, and we have a focus on the municipalities, and sometimes we forget to also think about building a capability in the other spheres of government for ethical leadership, so that the three systems, those principles that you were talking about earlier on, out of the Code of Ethical Leadership, that they can assist this municipal official. The second thing that I also want to talk about is, we were talking about, and I think it was you, Dr. Cloete, you're saying that municipal workers or the leaders in our municipal spaces are very busy. And you were saying that they need to do the quality work. It's not only, and my addition to what you were saying, Dr. Cloete, it's not only about them doing the quality work. Their busyness does not only compromise the quality of their work, but it also compromises their own ability to even have time for themselves and reflect on whether are they still the kind of leader that is required in public service to make sure that the aspirations of our communities are still met. Talking from our own experiences, because I've been in the local government space, when you set up those meetings that start from 9 o'clock in the morning and sometimes run until 9 o'clock in the evening, where do you then account for the time that this person needs to reflect on the day and say, which decisions did I take today that are compromising not only for myself, but for the community that I am that I am servicing. So as much as we can talk about work, we also need to talk about how the system is not designed, and it is designed by people. We have not designed a system that allows a municipal worker to just focus on themselves so that they better a person, and that person, when they show up to the office tomorrow, they're able to do these all these kind of things that we were talking about earlier on. And then it also goes back, Dr. Cloete and Anton, it goes back to when we introduce these people into the system. And I remember this very well because you go through psychometric assessments. And I'm now reflecting to one of the principles that are coming out of the Code of Ethics, because it says you need to appoint staff with competence and integrity. So you do a competency, these assessments, they test whether you are competent. They also test somewhat your levels of integrity, but it's a once-off thing. You are employed in a municipality there. Back in the day, it was only for 5 days if you're a senior manager, but now it's now permanent. But it's a once-off thing to see whether where are you on this integrity matrix. Shouldn't we then say, on an ongoing basis, one, these tests or assessments that checks whether you're the right person for the job, they shouldn't just be once-off things. On an ongoing basis, we just make sure that we test whether are people still fit for purpose. Yes, you may be competent, you may be an excellent engineer, you may be an excellent accountant, but are your values, have they shifted? Because in that way as well, Dr. Cloete, you'll be able to see how the environment has changed this person who entered into this space, being well, being good, and having such high values. Has the environment changed this person? And if it has, yes, we talk about consequence management, but at the earliest sign of a shift, do you not then want to say, how do we help so that we can bring this person back before it escalates into something that is very good? Once-off tests and once-off assessments, in my own view, are not helpful, but I will also emphasize this point. Just creating or making sure that how we design the workflows and structures in our municipalities allows for leaders, and we've defined leaders not only to be senior managers, for leaders to be self-reflective and create space for trust, for people to be able to express where they have concerns, where their own ethics might be compromised just by way that the institution that they work with does things. Thank you.
No, that's wonderful. And again, your inputs further supports what I normally say within the PPT framework, your people, processes, and technology. The people element, it requires attention because we can have good processes, procedures, as you've touched on, systems, but if we don't deal with the people factor or element, which then, as you correctly aligns you to say, you might have a good person joining an institution, but the environment tends to change that person. That becomes a people factor. Dr. Kaywood, there are some comments and questions that were directed to your contribution. There was one on democracy from Tembelani, which you might touch on, but also other inputs and submissions that have come through. But as we do so, I just want to touch on one comment that came from Advocate Singh, who really makes a reference to a Roman law maxim that no punishment without a crime, or no punishment without a criminal provision. Then it goes further to say it is pointless to have legal provisions, and Anton has touched explicitly on those as we started, and they came through the discussion. If those legal provisions do not result to the wrongdoer being punished. And again, it goes back to this issue of consequence management, that yes, we've got the gaps in the system, we've got the challenges that we have, but where actions ought to be taken, it doesn't matter the laws that we have. If we don't apply and exercise such as leaders, as managers, we might be missing the point. Erica in the Q&A had a question as well to say, how are citizens empowered to alert municipalities on individuals that are bringing the organization into disrepute? One of the tools or options to empower the citizens, I always challenge people like me as these professionals, practitioners, to say, based on the knowledge that we have, the understanding that we have on the processes and the systems, how do we then use that as part and parcel of empowering, but not only empowering, but actually providing that support to the citizens for them to be able to participate on how they are governed. It goes to that level. There is no single source of that particular solution. We all agree that our citizens or the communities have somehow taken a backseat on governance, but then that empowerment that we are calling for rests upon, I will say, all of us. And I say it's a group project to ensure that we've got communities, citizens who effectively participate and contribute in governance. Dr. Kaywood, let me allow you to come in, and then after you come in, we will then take the last poll, and then thereafter, I will be allowing the panelists just to, I'll say, as part of the closing, make those closing reflections, insights, in ensuring that, of course, our audience do go back with practical things to do in closing the gap that we often complain about. Dr. Kaywood?
Thank you, ZB. I think if I was controlling the mic, I would perhaps be generous and give about 3 minutes to Dr./Advocate Singh. I cannot disagree with him. I think he's a better law expert than me. So he's just making a comment, which I really appreciate. So if I had a control of the mic, I would let him have a few words. Then there was a comment about democracy. I'm not an expert on democracy and all of that, but common sense tells me if local government, being the closest sphere to the people or citizens, we deem it essential for democratic participation. So if it is in dire states, responding now to the question, then for me, it's a signal of a concerning profound crisis in the functioning and the legitimacy of our democracy and just our institutions, really. And it's a dysfunction that undermines service delivery, that undermines the citizen trust. It undermines accountability, public accountability at all levels. And one would then say, in fact, it threatens the foundational principles of inclusive governance and the popular sovereignty that we pride ourselves in as a country. So that is the one question that I saw. I did wanted to make another input, seeing that we have time. If I can just maybe take a minute or two to say the poor state of accountability in the public sector, and you know there's this tendency to focus on local government when we speak, as if ethical behavior, corruption, and all these ills are uniquely reserved for local government. So I like to talk about the public sector because we are seeing it from all the organs of state, seeing it from all the spheres of government. Yes, perhaps it is mostly reported upon on local government. I'm not a denialist. I'm just saying if we focus on one organ of state and we do not highlight the issues, similar issues with others, I don't know. So whenever I talk about these issues, my observation is really on the public sector in its entirety. And in my view, there's a poor state of accountability in the entire public sector. Yes, there's some dysfunction of municipalities because, Cocter would generously report on and give us a list of all the dysfunctional municipalities similar to Treasury. But we do not have the similar measures then for provincial or national government, because there are also organs of state that are, exhibiting some concerning levels of dysfunction. So with all of this that is happening in our public sector, we need to explore alternative or maybe complementary interventions if the public sector is to deliver, if in particular local government is to deliver, services in a sustainable manner. And I say perhaps we should be looking at the King 4 report. I don't know if 5 is out yet, because it's one of the tools that really should make a difference. Amongst its innovations, I learned the inclusion of supplements for local government and other actors. In the King 4 report, the King 4 report now applies to all the categories, for instance, of municipalities. And there's, I counted about 16 principles that apply to local government. Please do not shoot me if I'm wrong, but that is what I could count, one of which was councils are called to lead ethically and effectively. They are called to govern the ethics of a municipality in ways that really support that ethical culture. And so as we talk today about this topic, let us not forget that there's King 4 that could perhaps assist us to potentially improve this loyalty to law and responsive governance, because in my view, there's a connection between ethical leadership as well as governance, right? And then lastly, ZB, and importantly for me, if we're looking at and I want to focus on the King 4 report, if we look on corporate governance as defined in the King report, it's the exercise of ethical and effective leadership by municipalities towards the achievement of an ethical culture, good performance, and effective control and legitimacy. That's the King 4 version. So it then, in my view, then recognizes that good governance starts with character of those that we have tasked with upholding good governance, not the rules and procedures, but good governance. So effective leadership then goes beyond efficient implementation of laws, of regulations, of even this King 4 report that I'm talking about and other guides. It calls for political and administrative leadership to embody the characteristics of ethical leaders and collectively cultivate and exhibit these in our conduct, because people are watching. It is one thing to say to people, do not do this, but you are more effective when you then show them in your behavior as a leader. In this way, then King 4 complements those principles and values that Mr. Groenewald talked about in section 195 of our constitution that call for the promotion and maintenance of high standards of professional ethics in the entire public administration. So the traditional approach of fostering ethical leadership, in as much as I'm an advocate for consequence management, but some of the traditional approaches that we, have enforced, such as the code of conduct, training, establishment of ethics committees, and even going to the courts, by the way, do not always work. And if you want to know what I mean, I think you should just Google the case of Groenewald Municipality here in the Western Cape versus the Western Cape Minister of Local Government, where a municipality really took the time and reported, investigated rather, and reported and recommended to the minister that there was breach here of the code of conduct by this particular councillor. Minister, or rather MEC, please do what you are supposed to do. And the minister did not do. The matter ended up in court. Safe to say, the municipality lost the case, and if we are then failed, even at that level where people even act against wrongdoing and report, then where are we to go? So I know that I'm probably conflicting myself in that I'm talking about consequences, but sometimes people really do act, and yeah, thanks.
No, that is much appreciated, Doc. And again, as we step closer to the panelists, as they are busy shaping their closing reflections based on the conversation itself, there are just two comments that I want to touch on. One from Terence, and again, Terence Arendse is one of those regular participants and contributors. So as many who have come through today, looking at the chart and the questions. Just on the issue of the performance reviews in monitoring the quality of the work that is provided, then Terence goes on to say ongoing testing of officials are not required as suggested by the panelists. It might have been a linkage to the contribution that came from Nosipho. But one thing I want to mention, Terence, it might not be the testing, but that assessment of the gaps based on the performance agreements, the performance reviews. It then assists any manager in recommending a developmental area that an employee should either go to or attend in ensuring that there's that improvement in the skills itself. So yes, it might not be the testing in a true sense of words, but that assessment then assists in building the institutions that we so look forward in ensuring that we've got functioning municipalities. There was also a comment that came specifically to the hosts and panelists, which is about professionalization broadly. And again, what I'll say there, the current conversations on professionalization touch exactly on that point, because the comment comes as, don't you think that professionalization of public sector shall mitigate against the trust deficit that we are experiencing? If civil servants are registered with their professional bodies, they may think twice before acceding to unethical temptations, as they run the risk of being stripped of their practicing certificates. That's the current conversation. And the push around professionalization itself is also to ensure that the institutes, the bodies out there, they also have some accountability mechanisms that their members subscribe to. In light of those, I'll allow Dan, as I've indicated, for us to take the last poll of today, which then thereafter, I'll then allow our panelists just to reflect on the conversation, but more so what will be the last message on messages that will assist our audience to apply and implement as they continue with their daily operations. The question that we have, does your institution have an ethics officer? And again, if we talk about ethics, ethical conduct, which has drawn us to this conversation, it therefore says there ought to be that officer who is key in ensuring that any ethical dilemma, any ethical issue, it then gets channeled through the right processes. And according to those who have already taken the poll, it's 33% yes in terms of the ethics officer, 44% with a no, and then about 19% still working on it. And again, that 47% now of no, it will also be a recommendation and a suggestion from this webinar to say, please look at that, especially given the ethical dilemmas that we have, the code of conduct, ethical conduct that we touched on. It therefore requires that key person within our institutions to ensure that we do have those officers. As we are about to end the poll, we still have yes in 35%, and no 50%, and working on it at 15%. Colleagues, let's go back to our institutions. Let's ensure that we influence where the ethics officer is not available, so that we've got an environment that will ensure that ethical conduct, ethical governance, ethical leadership is then embedded within our institutions. Anton, let me take you, just your closing reflections and further suggestions for our audience. You can come in.
I'm happy to go for another 2 hours, but I think my office is going to burn down with the number of calls coming through. So Zolani, I think one of the reasons I'm always invited is to share actual practical experiences on a day-to-day basis. So I've got 3 scenarios of actual events that brings to bear the nature of the ethical challenge that local government faces at a very simplistic level. Before I do so, I want to acknowledge Ntombi Barth. Yes, courage and resilience is how we survive in government, but not all officials and senior managers have the, shall I call it, the psychological and psychosocial tools to navigate extremely complex and demanding environments. And I think that leads me to the next point with Adam Bogatso's, in his comment, raises the very complex issue of what I called conditional ethicality. If I am acting in a corrupt and fraudulent manner to put food on the table, when we get into the space of conditional ethicality, Chair, that is very dangerous grounds, because then we can begin to create the circumstances that would justify and warrant behavior that we think to be contrary to the values and vision that we have as members in the space. So let me get to my 3 scenarios. I hope I've acknowledged the people that I just wanted to. So I want to give you 3 real life scenarios, right? I'm going to go through them quickly so that people understand. I'm not going to disclose in which municipality or in which province this took place, but this was all on my watch. Scenario 1, an electrical team responds to a power outage. While they're on site, this is late at night, some of the workers were there with the work vehicle, those with the duly authorized work vehicle with all the necessary equipment, and 2 individuals arrived in private vehicles to be able to exercise the necessary oversight. They returned to the depot on completion of the task. As they sign out, obviously the work vehicle is returned to the depot, the private vehicles are leaving. As the private vehicles leave, security does an assessment, and in the assessment they discover undisclosed cable in the vehicle. Now, for all of you who know about electricity, cable theft is a sickness in institutions, and obviously until the Second-Hand Goods Act is enforced with extraordinary punitive measures, scrap dealers and the like are going to continuously get away with it. So what was the ruling, colleagues? So it's not explicit theft, is it? Because the staff member claims I was on a job, I was responding to a power outage, I had inadvertently left the leftover cable in my vehicle. So we introduced a concept that is not theft. It was called unauthorized possession, and we changed the staff policy to allow 1 strike rule. You're allowed to have unauthorized equipment and or materials in your vehicle once. Because, when you do it the second and the third time, then this is no longer unauthorized possession. This is attempted theft. So to my colleagues, there's an indication of how ethicality and ethics standard can be allowed to shift to allow for circumstances, but not in such a manner that people can then act with impunity. Scenario 1. Scenario 2, the traffic testing department always had a group of people randomly hanging around outside the facility. The complaints would come in that there was fraud and corruption, but we had no way of proving it. So on one given day, the municipal manager arrived at the testing station and said, Harlan, you are testing these 10 individuals. I'm unilaterally withdrawing you. We're going to allocate another testing individual. So we say, okay, replace Harlan with Zolani. What do you think happened? all 10 persons who were scheduled to do their test drive with Harlan refused to take their test with Zolani. And when you've got 6 testing officials and you see a pattern, what happens? You start to immediately question, why are these people always hanging around outside, and why is it that when we cancel at short notice, that those people who were supposed to be tested, because theoretically, colleagues, if you're there for your test drive, it's irrelevant to you who the testing official is, isn't it? You presume that that testing officer has the necessary capacity to ensure that you get a fair test, regardless of who it is. So we noticed there was a relationship, but there was no proof and there was no evidence to demonstrate that there was any, that we couldn't close the loop on the evidential loop to be able to take actions against them. So what did we do? Well, we introduced CCTV cameras outside so we could track who was there on a daily basis. And we introduced random testing. The chief traffic officer, previous one, was dismissed on other grounds. A new chief traffic officer, random testing was introduced. We couldn't take any action because there wasn't sufficient proof and sufficient evidence. And our legal advice at the time was that to take a class action against all of them would not have the desired outcome. What was the consequence? There were a lot less incidents at the traffic station. The unintended consequence, there was a lot less revenue coming into the city officially as well. So you want to act with ethicality, you can also have an unintended consequence on your own institution that you end up taking less revenue because, believe it or not, there was some form of complementary relationship in covert activity and your own official activity. The third incident is there are 2 that are similar. So this is in a case of diesel theft. The Parks truck breaks down while engaging in Parks for activities. We had introduced a no tamper policy. Once your vehicle breaks down, whether it's a traffic vehicle, a tractor, a truck, whatever the case is, whatever the issue is, if the vehicle breaks down, you are supposed to call in the workshop. You're not supposed to tamper with the battery. You're not supposed to tamper with the fuel, because ostensibly you should know whether there's fuel in the vehicle or not. During the course of the response of call out from the workshop and getting to the site of the tractor, 50 liters of diesel evaporated. And I use the word evaporated because we couldn't account for what had happened to it. So we assessed that, okay, during that hour and a half it took for the call-out vehicles to get to the truck, 50 liters had evaporated. There's no proof of theft. There's no demonstration. There's no affidavit to say Zolani was the driver, Harlan was the assistant, and Anton was on the back of the truck, and therefore they colluded to steal. Because if 50 liters disappear while you have staff responsible for it, theft is implied, right? So we had to use gross negligence because we couldn't prove theft. If while you are standing next to the vehicle that you are responsible for and 50 liters automatically disappear, even though I can imply theft, I can't prove theft, but I can prove gross negligence. You couldn't prove that the 50 liters of diesel had fallen out the back of the truck or that the tank was damaged or anything, but 50 liters had disappeared. We won that on appeal. They were dismissed. So in one case, we had a strike rule. In one case, we couldn't take any action, but we introduced measures. In the third instance, we could because we could imply it and so forth. And then my last one, just very quickly, is introducing devices and gadgets for water and sanitation that manages overtime, materials, and job cards. And what have we seen? Significant reduction in waste on materials, significant reduction in overtime, because staff no longer make use of material or paper, they make use of gadgets. So the introduction of technology to improve processes and systems. And so, colleagues, just in closing then, so, a lot of what we say has an esoteric feel to it. But when you sit in the space in local government, all of these esotericness is reduced to decision making. Because if you don't put in the right policy amendment on undisclosed, unauthorized possession, because you don't want to be overly punitive, so you introduce a one-strike rule, so it's not outright theft. You introduce technological changes by bringing CCTV cameras outside the testing station on gadgets for those who are responding to water and sanitation, electricity outages, so you can track that it's 2 hours of overtime, not 4 hours of overtime, because by the time the paperwork is completed, the actual facts are lost, although we won't get into the fact that maybe it was only supposed to be 2 hours of overtime, but we were looking for more hours and there was no way to manage it. So these 4 scenarios teach you that the practical ethics is a daily activation and a daily action in local authorities. by virtue of these types of decisions. And so in closing, I mean, we all are called upon to manage our resources more effectively, to make the right decisions under sometimes extremely difficult circumstances. And I think it is up to us, those present here today, to keep this as at the forefront and to be ambassadors for this kind of behavior in all of the spaces that we occupy. Thank you, Chair. I apologize if I went on longer than I intended.
No, thanks a lot for that, Anton, for joining us, but also your closing on its own. I'll say it's a masterclass for those who really want to learn. Dr. Cloete, let me allow you also to come in, just the closing remarks.
Okay, I'm not quite sure I've got the closing remarks. I think the one thing that we didn't touch on, for me, I said in the beginning, everything rises and falls on leadership. I think there's a particular mental model of leadership in municipalities that's highly politicized, highly hierarchical. You know, you have to yes MM, no MM, yes director, no director. I must almost bow down to you. So that's what I picked up in my research. There's still a very much a bask-up mentality in managers. I remember when I started teaching as a high school teacher, the advice that I got from one colleague was, you must be rude with these kids. You must show them that you're in control. You must swear at them. They must know that you take no nonsense. And I tried this nonsense for the first 3 months, until I went to another classroom where another colleague was, but the kids responded completely differently. And I asked him, what are you doing? He says, I show these children my heart. And because they see that I love them and I care, I win their trust like that. And so I think we need to look at our leadership mental model and how does that aid and support institutional growth. The second thing is the organizational governance culture in our organizations. You know, I think that has got a big role to play. The work culture, the work ethic. I come to some municipalities where people are eating porridge in the kitchen till after 8, 9, and it's like Thabo Mbeki once said, former president, people come to work as late as possible, do as little as possible, expect to be paid as much as possible, to leave as early as possible. And so the working culture is what you need to address. The learning culture. People tell me within organizations, municipalities, managers say, while I'm here, you will go nowhere. I'll block your growth. So the working culture, the learning culture, the community participation culture, do we genuinely believe in what we're doing, or is it just compliance? In many cases, it's just tick boxes, like clean audit and dirty streets. You know, you can have a clean audit, but you're not that link between effectiveness and efficiency. And then the political culture in the organization, I think all of that contributes to this ethical culture. And I think it takes courage to be a manager in a municipality. You must have difficult conversations or I think courageous conversations. Leadership is having the courage of your convictions to follow through. And so how we create this ethical, accountable culture, there's a lot of variables that add on to that. And I think the number one for me is the tone is set at the top. I've researched 2 municipalities. The one leads militaristic, also clean audit. The one leads with love and compassion, also clean audit. But people tell me with a love manager, managing with love, it's a joy to work with him because he allows also the opportunities for mistakes. So yeah, thank you. I think that would be my closing comments. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Doctor, for bringing this soft side of leaders as well, because it really does go a long way. That is much appreciated. Nosipho, your closing insights?
Thank you. I've really enjoyed this discussion and I've learned a lot. My closing remarks are going to draw from what the other panelists have shared here, and also the participants. The one thing that was spoken of, but we didn't really spend much time on, I don't think we should have, but it's worth mentioning. It's the cost of corruption, the cost of an organization that has got a culture of being unethical. And we really do need to think about it, because if we can quantify, then we are able to say how much are we losing as an organization in money terms. Not that that's the only measure that you need to pursue for. I think Anton, in his example around how they've used technology, invested in technology, already tells us that there is that linkage. And in a situation where we're finding our municipalities having less and less resources because of the economy that we have and the inability of the citizenry to pay for services, every cent should count. And how then do we use ethical leadership to help you be more efficient in how you are managing your finances in the municipality? The second thing that I also want to maybe close on this point, it's also what both myself and Dr. Lungelwa touched on. This is not just a municipal space discussion, ethical leadership. All spheres of government have got a role to play because they are interdependent, they are linked. So while we put our focus on municipalities, because most people here interact with municipalities or they interface with them, there is a need for us to elevate the discussion to say, how do the other spheres of government support by creating conducive environment for ethical leadership to take place? Thirdly, I would also want to emphasize this point. The type of people, the type of leaders that we have here today, and the type of citizens that we have today are different from the type of leaders and the citizens that we have in the future. What may not be different, as Anton had said earlier on, are those basic principles in terms of what are the norms, in terms of the values that should prevail in society. So let's think about that and say, how do we anticipate that we will deal with these things in future and create systems that will allow us to deal with them in future? And then lastly, if everything that we do is meant to be about the communities, community-centeredness, every day we need to ask ourselves, how did the decisions that I made in my workspace, or how did the decisions that I did not make in my workspace how do they show that I put people at the center? And how then do we enable for that transparency so that communities can have trust in what we do in the institutions that we've built and in the work that we do within the local government space?
No, thanks a lot for that. And between myself and Dan, we always say if we manage to touch or change or contribute to someone in these webinars, even if it's one, we always say we achieve what we intended. And based on your opening remarks in your closing, we have done just that in this webinar of today. We are grateful for that. And secondly, from the request from Tabang, that's also another thing that we pride ourselves to say. This platform should also be a platform where we connect, where we broaden the reach in terms of learning from each other. Tabang, you can drop then an email in terms of your request for Anton's contacts. Definitely, I know Anton is always willing to assist where possible. And Dr. Kaywood, let's take your closing insights so that we can be able to conclude. Over to you.
Thank you so much. This is the second time this week I'm the last one to present. I do not know if that's a good or a bad thing, but in 1 minute, let me try and close off with these comments. Every one of us that is attending this webinar, and in fact, those that this webinar recording will reach when it is shared by Dan, is unique. We all have a unique role in our different spheres of influence. We have the power to ignite ethical leadership that will transform our local governance system or our public sector governance system, and in turn really uplift our community. So you're here because you are aware of that role. We are all leaders and change agents, regardless of whether or not you have the title. In one way or another, you are leading in some sphere. And so we can all continue lamenting on the state of municipal governance or public sector or whatever sphere of government you want to lament about. We can continue with the comparison. This one is better run, this party is running better municipalities, whatever, which is a topic for another day, by the way. So we can continue lamenting, or we can become the catalyst for the transformation that we want to see. What needs to happen is clear in my view. All of us must champion ethical leadership by doing three things. One, you model integrity in every decision that you make if you have a power to make decisions. This decision may include these small things that you consider as insignificant, like choosing not to shortlist an external candidate over an internal one that you want to promote because the external candidate has stronger credentials than your internal one. That's not ethical. That is not fair. The second thing is promoting transparency as our default mode of operation, because that applicant that you have rejected actually has a right in terms of the Constitution to a fair and just administrative action in terms of PAJA. So the decision that you take to shortlist or not shortlist someone, you must know that it can be reviewed. You must know that that person is entitled, when you choose not to appoint them, is entitled to come back and ask for decisions and things that we take for granted and we think people are cheeky. The last issue is demanding rigorous consequence management that operates without fear or favor for everybody that is really trying to be on the right side of the law. When we all embody these values, in closing, regardless of which sphere of government you are, including the public sector, when we all embody these values, we become the engines of this transformation that we desperately need in this country. We create conditions for sustainable development. We contribute towards advancing the social justice that we are desperate for in this entire country, and we enhance the quality of life eventually for all that live in South Africa.
Thanks to our panelists in ensuring that you've taken time and contribute continuously so on this reimagined local government, reimagined societies. We do appreciate your contributions. To the audience, as Dan has indicated, for the next year, if you've got any proposals of the topics and themes that we must cover, you can channel those suggestions and proposals, but also to yourselves. We thank you so much for your insights, for being an active audience that not only ask questions, because we are about solutions, and out of your contributions, we do pick some of those solutions. We hope to see you in our next few webinars that are left for this year with this high energy, these insights. We do really appreciate your contributions. At this point, from our side, the Future Cities Africa and the Municipal Edge, thank you all. Until we meet in our next webinars, that will be in October. Enjoy what's left of today. From our side, we are off. Enjoy. Thanks a lot.